Overwatch 1 was the only shooter game to win Game of the Year, and Overwatch 2 is the worst reviewed game in Steam history. The polarized emotions about this franchise are about as explosive as the gameplay itself, which either can make you feel like a god or a puny plaything depending on how the match goes, depending on how they balance your characters and their counters, depending how broken the new heroes are, and depending if your dumbass teammates help you or not. I've been a competitive gamer for as long as we've had online games. I started with Quake 3 as a kid, to StarCraft as a teen, Dota 1, then Call of Duty, where I was a content creator for years, and then after that, wanting something more hardcore, I went to Counter-Strike, where I played with a small friend group, and then Overwatch, where I decided to pull together a few of those CS friends and try to cover it professionally. In that time, I've seen the reputation of Overwatch shift more harshly than any game that I can remember. At launch, because the entire gaming industry still thought of Blizzard as the golden child, Overwatch, with all its flaws, was accepted with open arms by everyone. At the time, no creator dared to be critical of Overwatch because the popular sentiment online was to want positivity. It was actually hard for me personally because I wanted the game to improve and I had lots of criticism to give. So while I try to be polite about it, but we told Blizzard to get their shit together for years and years, and they seemingly were always behind servicing the game with what it needed. Balance was slow, features were lacking, and the devs seemed content with the game being an actual unplayable mess for most of its life. That was unacceptable to me the entire time. I said it routinely. I think some players forget some facts like this. Roll queue came out halfway through Overwatch 1's life cycle. People talk about Overwatch 1's history as if the game was 222, when half of its history didn't even include a feature that I personally think was required to enjoy the game at any level of play, and I consider the before times actually unplayable. And I don't care what Video Game Donkey says about open queue, I think he's wrong.
How did this moronic system even make it into the first game, let alone make it all the way into Overwatch 2?
On the other hand, a lot of players hated roll queue for how it extended queue times for top players, even though I think it was required to at least make the most popular mode, quick play, actually function. This goes to show you, we will never please everyone with the decisions with this game. Too many competing interests at the same time. So for me, Overwatch 1 was a long slog of praying for a drop of effort from the devs that had fundamentally uncompetitive ideas. They seemed inept because in reality, they were. They basically openly admitted this years later, something that I used to insult them about, that they were devs that wanted to make an MMO, but seemingly accidentally made a competitive shooter and had no idea how to maintain or improve it. I used to insult them by saying Overwatch was Call of Duty for World of Warcraft fans, and the devs just wanted to make an RPG team comp builder instead of a shooter game. That's what 6v6 played like, and I wish they leaned more into the shooter elements the entire time, which is why I wanted to limit the power of synergies and team comps with hero bans so early on. Ironically enough, the community of viewers at the time back then pushed back against us, no matter how polite we tried to be. They said we were being too harsh. They said that we're never satisfied with what Blizzard gave us. We asked for a team queue, so instead they gave us a basically useless group finder. We asked for hero bans, and instead they gave us the abomination that was hero pools. I spent years and years covering this game to be basically ignored and told my opinion was worthless. And the community of viewers hated our complaining. They told us we should be grateful they're adding anything to the game or even attempting to improve it. And here I am again today, at odds with the community in the other direction, it seems. It's funny and a bit sad, because depending on who you ask and when you ask them, I'm either a shill today or I was a hater back then. Turns out I'm actually just real, and people hate you if you don't mirror their opinion, which I will never do, not for popularity ever. I think a lot of what I just said might be hard for you to believe if you entered Overwatch 2 or at the later stages of Overwatch 1, but there was an era where you got shame for criticizing Blizzard, and we, on purpose, did it anyway. But now it's gone the other direction, where it's a recipe to print views if you just complain about anything. And I think we all know why, because we're more familiar with the sentiment now, which is tainted by the long list of controversies and mistakes they've made. With the lawsuits, misconduct by their CEO, they lied to our faces about developing a story mode, said it was coming, then made it seem like it was going to be as cool and deep and replayable as they told us in the previous announcements. Then, surprise, most of it is canceled, and they released actual garbage, a story mode that was so bad, I wouldn't want to play it if it was even free. I'm actually glad Microsoft fully canceled it, because what they pushed out was terrible to me. archives minus. Shockingly bad in my estimation. The worst experience of its kind of any game I've ever played. I can't believe they actually charged any amount of money for it with how bad of quality it was. I remind you all about this now because as I sit here in front of you in 2024, the community sentiment has shifted to somehow think that it's even possible I'm a shill for Blizzard. Like I don't speak my mind about the game and instead am parroting talking points for them. And we'll cover this in a lot of the less offensive points made by this crowd, but this Illuminati conspiracy thinking is really getting out of hand with our community. I wish my history of giving my blood, sweat, and tears for this game and its community was enough to protect me from shill accusations, but apparently it's not. I spent years asking for things that Overwatch 2 finally did. That's why I have less to complain about these days. Because unlike some of the flat earthers among the Overwatch scene, I don't commit the moving the goalpost fallacy. If I ask for something and the devs address it, I'm happier about it because failing to do so is intellectually dishonest. I don't just constantly go back to my pet theories and talking points that will, quote, save the game, which for me has always been hero bans and draft mode anyway. Both things I've given up on, even though I truly think it's the real solution to many of the things people complain about, especially the things that people forget were problems in both formats, 5v5 and 6v6. Yet they lay it at the feet in Overwatch 2 as if it's exclusively a problem there. Not the case. Most of the problems were in both games. Just the results are slightly shifted. I fought the devs for years to properly service the game in the way that they're doing now. We were such a thorn in the developer's side. Jeff Kaplan told me in person that when he heard my intro music, he got anxiety over whether I was going to positively or negatively review the current update or whatever they just added. It's crazy to me that I have to defend myself when devs are literally shaking to know what I'm going to say about their next update. Because I'll tell you something about criticism, and content creators get this all the time. The harshest ones are the ones that have a merit of truth to them. It's usually easier, not for me because I'm really sensitive, but it's usually easier to write off really unfounded criticism. But that is also why we have to be careful to make sure that the things that we're telling the devs are accurate. If we as the community found our criticism based on lies and misrepresentation and confusion, the Overwatch 1 devs win because they believed we were all forum trolls and we should be ignored. Those old WoW devs basically hated their consumer base, felt they were above them. That's the vibes I got with Overwatch 1, and it's because they had an air of superiority after their accomplishments with World of Warcraft. And then of course they tripped, fell, and made a game of the year in Overwatch 1, so how could they ever be wrong about anything? That was actually their vibe. One last thing about the culture of our game, and then I'll get to 6v6. Today in 2024, I feel like we have entered the late stage of our game. We're all sick of their shit and demand results. And good, we should. Blizzard played fast and loose with the facts, and they did a giant rug pull and have made many dumbass mistakes that will take a long time for gamers to get over. That, and we all remember loving Overwatch 1. So many of us think we should just revert the game back to how it was, do a WoW classic. Here's the thing. This reminds me so much of the trajectory of Call of Duty and its content, which even today is stuck in a cycle of self-hatred at the game they purportedly love. Modern Warfare, the original 1 and 2, were a broken mess, but they were an unprecedented game at the time, mixing RPG class builder elements into a shooter game, which is why I fell in love with it at the time and started making content in Modern Warfare 3 when I started to think the game was jumping the shark and heading in the wrong direction. As Call of Duty got older, players longed for the simpler days of the original Modern Warfare, yet seemingly forgot how much bullshit they ignored at the time, how unbalanced the entire game was, and a long list of things that they just overlooked about how different their perception and expectations were and what they were willing to tolerate. Not that the game was objectively better, but they were different. I think the same thing is happening for Overwatch now, where the nostalgia goggles really are severe, and further, knowing too much about Overwatch makes us forget about our own survivorship bias, as many of the things we may be willing to tolerate about Overwatch drove away other players in their millions, killing our game. Now, to be perfectly clear, you're free to love and enjoy whatever version of the game you like. You can have any opinion you want. And while I think the facts are there's no way Blizzard should go back to 6v6, I think Blizzard is so committed to listening to feedback that even though I think it's a terrible idea, they may listen to you. I don't see a reason beyond maybe a technical limitation, which may be the case, we don't know, that they can't at least do a test to see how people respond. And I'm so confident that I think it would be helpful, in fact. I think the same issues that it had at the time would resurface again. can. And if I can't convince you in this video, maybe we just got to do a test so that you can feel the pain points again to remember how bad it actually was, as opposed to looking back in a game that you can't even play anymore. For me, I think this is a waste of time. I think dedicating any amount of effort towards making this function with the new heroes and modes and everything else would set the dev team back years. But we have an open esports scene now. I'd support you guys wanting to do a pro mod version of the game if the top players think this is the best way to play competitive Overwatch. Go for it. I'm not married to my own ideas here, guys. I never have been. But I guess there's no clout to be gained in our community if you're not extreme. I want hero bans. Still not gonna get it seems. I don't get the format I want. I think somehow instead, because so many others have been talking about this, I've been labeled in a false dichotomy in this situation as if I'm pro 5v5. I didn't ask for this format. What are you talking about? I just think it's better. As terrible as it is, I think 6v6 is just more pain and misery. Overwatch is a tough game to get everyone to agree. What I actually don't like, I'm not a fan of this at all, is the devs trying to reinvent the wheel over and over. I hate this boom bust cycle of balance. I hate the inconsistency of this game. They're changing the entire rules of the game so fast that I find it impossible to improve or be consistent with my own gameplay or even make consistent content about it. I want to go back to making epic-sized videos, and I think I still can, but the reality is if they change the game and the matchup so fundamentally every few months, how do I spend hundreds of hours making a single video and have it invalidated by the next patch? I'm really bored of them trying to overly transform the game over and over. I don't like that, and I don't like that they seemingly listen to every single Timmy's opinion. Listening to everyone all at once makes this game lose focus and direction, where I'd prefer if they had a bit of the old dev energy, at least knowing what they want. So I'm not against 6v6 because Blizzard told me to say it, a hilarious accusation to begin with. I'm against it because it would be a massive undertaking for the devs, and I think would set us back years of development time to rework all of it, just like the Overwatch 1 needed reworks in order to function. The truth is that in life, there is no solutions, only trade-offs. Remember that whenever you think any format, change, balance, addition is ever going to fix anything in this game. There's no fixing it. You can't fix it. Fixing it isn't the option. The only options you have is trade-offs here or trade-offs there. So rather than talk about fixing anything, we need to talk about trade-offs, because that's how things work in reality. They have nuance, each decision with its own pros and cons. There isn't one good or one bad. Life is not that simple. The only position on this game I think is objectively correct is that we all have different opinions on what the best version of Overwatch is, and we will never agree. Not even the pros can agree, and certainly the casuals don't agree either. All it takes is a quick scroll through the comments section of any video talking about Overwatch to see how radically different all of the takes are. No camp of players actually agree, even if they seem like they do. Because even if they gave you guys 6v6, you wouldn't agree on how it should be balanced. There will always be complaints, as I hopefully will detail in the rest of this video, which is why I think the only global fix that even gets close to fixing anything is hero bans, because all the other solutions attempt to be one size fits all and don't apply equally to the different skill tiers and playstyle differences among the player base. Whereas at least hero bans, you'll get some effect on the meta locally in your own game individually, no matter what area of the game you play. Pro level, gold level, doesn't matter. But we don't have time for actual useful solutions. We have to debate Flat Earth today. One of my favorite documentaries that I've ever seen is called Beyond the Curve, and it goes over the Flat Earth movement, why people believe it, how it started and got more popular over time. Now, while in the documentary, there's a few jabs at the expense of these misguided folks, overall, it has a climax message that says we should be trying to invite these people in and have a real conversation with them, which I thought was heartwarming and inspiring, and certainly something I aspire to do, but struggle because I am also a toxic, rage-filled gamer like the rest of you. That being said, a lot of the arguments and certainty that people bring to the 6v6, 5v5 debate are as unfounded and easily disproven as statements made by Flat Earth. What the documentary explains is that people get invested into the tribalism and belonging of it. They fall in love with the ideas of what it represents instead of looking at the veracity of the claims being made. Early on in the doc, one of the Flat Earthers explains that one of the bits of evidence they use to come to their conclusion is that there isn't flights going into the southern hemisphere. And then the chick pops on and says, this isn't a difficult test to run. Oh, look, there is that right there. So it gets confusing. How is it possible for people to discount evidence that's right in front of them? Turns out with human psychology, it's very easy, in fact. And it's a very human thing to do, to be misguided by your emotions. We all all do it, myself included. By the end of the documentary, they run a test where they try to track a beam of light miles across in the distance, and they correctly point out that if the test is to work and the Earth is rounded, then the guy at the origin of the light source will have to raise the light above his head to account for the curve of the Earth for the guy miles away. But even as that very thing happens, they blame it on a bush in the way or something, even though it wouldn't even have made sense to the way they've conducted the experiment. It couldn't be a thing blocking it. But anyway, this is how easy it is to me to discount so many of the 6v6 arguments are actually this simple. And because some of the strongest proponents of it know the game so well, they can be blinded by their own ego and certitude of what they're talking about that they miss very basic details. Now, I've spent weeks studying basically everything Samito has said about this subject. And as I think you guys know, I consider Sam like my nephew in the Overwatch gaming space. I don't really like the tone that he has set about this conversation. I feel it has inflamed things and brought shit to my doorstep because as I disagree with him, I get a lot of toxicity from his fan base who thinks I'm a shill because Sam says that those who disagree are shills. So not a huge fan of that. Not a huge fan of the us versus them psychology he uses in the marketing of his videos. This is what they think about your opinions. Like, come on, man. You're causing this to be a tribalistic thing when we're all in the same boat together. So not happy about how my nephew's conducting himself, but we're in family here in Overwatch. I love the guy anyway. I hope he leans back on that, and I look forward to him addressing the long list of criticisms I have against his arguments. Sam is an expert on Overwatch, and that's part of the problem, in fact. Too much confidence in your own ability to play the game loses perspective on your ability to know how the design of the game affects the rest of the world beyond you. It biases you, and that lack of perspective causes a painful amount of Dunning-Kruger effect. We have a big community of content creators that do not understand the ramifications of design decisions, and yet think they have all of the answers about design decisions. We're not designers, guys. We should listen to the designers and have a dialogue with them instead of preaching to them things we don't actually understand. And when we provide evidence, let's be beholden to that instead of dream up that we can have different evidence, which I'm seeing everywhere. Anyone who is sympathetic to the 6v6 cause so far dreams up that there could be evidence that has never materialized in real life. Okay, with that being said, and with love in my heart, ladies and gentlemen, I hope to go through the best arguments, things that I will not be arguing with at all. Let's steel man 6v6. What is the best aspects about it? The game certainly had a higher high-end skill ceiling. There was more to track, more going on, more chaos, more complexity, more variance, more abilities, and bigger moments, bigger setups, fat shatters, huge blades, and a tank battle that had ebb and flow to the game. The strategy of how you took positions with your tanks and how they interacted was far deeper than it ever could be with single tank. So if you really enjoyed the MOBA repositioning battle of getting your team into position, it mattered a lot. In fact, I would say it dominated the gameplay. If you look to the Overwatch League, the teams that went the farthest were the ones that had the best tank synergy usually, or entire team synergy around their tank play. The tanks were the superstars and did most of the heavy lifting throughout the history of 6v6. Conversely, at the highest levels in Overwatch 2, while we didn't have the Overwatch League for too long, tank gameplay instead became about flexibility, where the Florida Mayhem, I think, won the tank lottery because their star player, someone, could play lots of the tanks. We didn't really have enough time either with role queue or with competent balance to know what it could potentially be. So there is a mystery of what the peak Overwatch balance could be within 6v6, especially with a lot of the new and interesting designs that we got with Overwatch 2. Would some of the more oppressive metas that a lot of people didn't like get countered by Ramatra or Queen cleaving through all of the tank picks with an anti-heal style ultimate? With a lot of the tanks being more interesting in the Overwatch 2 design, a lot of players are optimistic that they would be fun in 6v6, whereas the tanks they added there were shield body or a bit over the top. Orisa, Sig, Wrecking Ball don't really have the shooter gameplay loop that we know from Ramatra, Queen, and Mauga. So I also think it wouldn't be difficult for any group of creators to balance 6v6, even with the new heroes, better than the devs ever did in Overwatch 1. That's an easy sell to make to me. I also think it's obvious that the team fights are more stable and the engagement engagements with each individual player are more reasonable because the stat differential between different characters, tank or squishy, is not as severe. If a tank steps out badly in 6v6 because their stats are lower, they could get nuked routinely. Whereas in Overwatch 2, they're sort of built to be able to hold their ground a little longer out in front on purpose to dumb down the gameplay. That is definitely true. 5v5 gameplay is intentionally more simple, so we should expect high-level tank gameplay to be less complex in 5v5 than it is in 6v6. These are all true statements. I think Hawk explains it actually very well. He says that in 5v5, there's like 10 wrong decisions and one clear, obvious right decision, and your ability to outplay the enemy tank is lower. I agree completely. Especially since all tanks have knockback resist, there's very little tank exchange with one tank moving the other out of the way. Like, yes, we've got reworked Rhine for Overwatch 2 who can pin you off the map, which is kind of annoying to be honest, but there's less of like hammer swinging the Rhine out of the way to physically make space for your team out of a choke, or counter diving as Winston onto the enemy Winston to boop him towards your team. There's just less of a physical space battle because both tanks are made to be more immune to knockback, and they kind of can stun each other or counter each other's mechanics, but there's not an in-depth positional exchange going on. In fact, a lot of those responsibilities go on to the squishy role instead in a more FPS mindset. Overwatch 2 5v5, when you battle for map control, is far more about getting angles with your shooter kit as opposed to your tanks forcing your way through to make space. But unfortunately, that's where I'm going to have to stop praising go back to 6v6. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the knockout arguments that I think make it clear that we can't do it. I see a lot of commenters as well as creators that seem to be confused about what the math of queue times represents. In the original 6v6 debate, Jake tried to explain revealed versus stated preferences. This is, human beings often say they'll do one thing, but then do another. So it really doesn't matter how many people we line up to say they liked two tanks. What really matters is, did they line up to play it? And the truth is, no matter what the format, no matter what the balance state, the only time players have been interested in playing tanks is in 2 times. When they've been broken and new in 5v5 when we first released Junker Queen, or around the mythical October patch, which we'll talk about that in a moment. I hear a lot of players say that free-to-play surely is going to help this issue, because more players means more players queuing in the different roles, right? Fortunately, this isn't how math works, because the queue times are representative of the ratio between the different roles at that given rank. So quick play queues are way better in 5v5, like instant for everybody, because the range and how they're able to queue you up and match you up is more flexible. With the role delta thing, they mostly pin the tanks against each other, I believe, and then everybody else can be kind of sorted out, so it's even a multitude better. Whereas in most eras of Overwatch 1, quick play queue times for damage were bad. You needed to have a flex queue pass to even get damage. I used to edit videos while queuing for damage for 10 minutes in quick play, and this is any single meta unreliant, and oftentimes the more casual players don't even play the most broken, unbalanced characters to begin with. So having a bigger player base doesn't help the tank queue problem, because what matters is proportionality. And in ranked, that's always going to be worse because they limit who's going to join into the match based on the ranked thresholds they're willing to put into one, which if you want a fair match, you also want that. This is how we got it to be the point where a lot of top ranking DPS players didn't want to sit and watch Gordon Ramsay in queue all day, and a lot of players left our game because of that. Having bad queue times makes it worse because it alienates new players from even getting in to attempt it. But okay, Frito, what about the most ideal, pristine balance state? The October patch, the best balance Overwatch 1 ever saw. Well, I want to poke a few holes in this and then make some pretty obvious points about the player population this is even representing. The October patch was a breath of fresh air after a long overdue balance problem with double shield. They sort of just threw their hands up in the air and nerfed double shield. So Winston, Reinhardt, and other tank comps began to be played and everything was glorious. But I think it's very important to note that that patch happened after Overwatch League was already done. The professional players were kind of ruining the meta balancing of the game in a way because they would grind the game so hard and min-max to such a severe degree that everybody would learn what the most broken things on the patch were and emulate that. And any time when those players were off and not grinding ranked, the meta copycatting got way less severe, which I think is an underrepresented help to that patch. Players were very happy for characters like Baptiste and Orisa to be at the bottom of the tier list, but there's a sizable unspoken minority who were not happy with that change. And we might choose, us top players in consensus making content together with similar views, that these players should be ignored. But they do exist. Players that wanted to play Orisa, but not feel punished by being required to have a perfect ideal team comp to function. This was part of the 6v6 design that a lot of players forget about. Characters were much more interconnected and required to run together. Whereas 5v5, they've kind of balanced it in a way where you mostly can vaguely do any of the given job that you need, and you don't necessarily have to have one version of a thing to function with another thing. And as they add more heroes, more overlap, more variety, as well as make the game more self-sufficient when you have self-healing passive and things like that, they're really trying to get away from that interconnectivity of the characters required to function together. That's part of Overwatch a lot of players hated, and something that top-ranked players tend to forget because they've mastered those synergies and fit into it quite nicely. Now, the most important hole that we're going to poke into the glorious October patch is pro 6v6 proponents shout from a mountaintop that it had balanced queue times. Queue times were great in that one fateful month in October, but they're really doing their argument a disservice when they don't acknowledge that there's a caveat to that. It was great for the top 3%. This is the area of the player base where balance matters the most. The vast majority of players in any version, in any format, in any patch, balance is pretty irrelevant until they make easy heroes OP, of course. But other than that, people are just kind of doing their own thing for basically 97 to 99% of players. Balance is almost irrelevant to them. What matters is the base functionality of the game, which, by the way, is something that Samito has said for years, which is why he argues you should only balance for the top tier of gameplay, and I push back against that a little bit. And we have to be selective of who gets included in that. Like, do we want Lifeweaver to be a top-down balanced hero? No. There's a lot of heroes that I think we should reasonably expect to have drop-off as they go up the ranks, but equally, if you gut a hero like Sojourn, Tracer, Widowmaker, they become more and more unplayable as you go down the ranks. So it happens both ends of the spectrum. And Orisa in Overwatch 1 was sent to the glue factory, which I can tell you is not something they want for their Overwatch characters. That's just a dud design. So they really tried to change Orisa to make her fun in Overwatch 2. And when the first rework came out, I think a lot of players were positive on the changes in comparison to the bunker playstyle she used to have. But overall, we still think kind of toxic to the game because just kind of a dumb easy mode tank hero. But hey, Overwatch always ends up with those types of picks in the game. There's like no way around it. And I think it's disingenuous to think that we're ever going to see a version of Overwatch that benefits from only skillful design. That's a huge mistake, guys, especially after my history of watching the gaming scene and seeing games that I like Quake Champions, or I didn't play this one, but it's similar in line with these, Shoot Mania. These games just die on the vine. In some part to a lot of the part of the reason why is they're just too skillful. Nobody's trying to play Quake 1v1s. They're too hard. A lot of our player base wants more accessible heroes, and that's part of Overwatch's identity. So it's going to stay and not go away. And then on the other end of it, with this October patch concept, is players think that they can somehow blow up that one data point in the history of 6v6 and expand it to an entire history of the game they wish existed. But that's not how reality works, guys. That's not how data collection works. In data collection, that would be called an outlier, the type of thing that you should completely ignore, actually, because the vast majority of time, tank synergies were oppressive. Now, the diehards that suffer from survivorship bias push against this sentence I just said. They, and I'm sure many of you hear me say that and say, no, they weren't. I liked Ryan Zarya. I liked Winston Diva. Well, if that's the case, then it shouldn't be too hard for me to find a prominent Twitch streamer that quit the game precisely because of tank synergy. If you don't know who TimTheTatMan is, I think he's a pretty good litmus test for the average shooter player. Nowadays, we know all of our dedicated Overwatch streamers, Emong, Jay, ML7, Flats, but back then, all of them either weren't streaming or had hundreds of views, and TimTheTatMan was our top dog, getting 10, 20, 30,000 concurrent viewers, insane numbers. Tim quit the game because of tank synergy. He says it in this clip right here.
Oh, Darren, thank you for 27 months, 5 so mad. Just why? Why aren't you playing Overwatch anymore? Tell us why. I quit. I'm tired of Winston. Winston jumps in. Diva's like, don't shoot my Winston, don't shoot my Winston, don't shoot my Winston. It's not fun. This is me, live look at me playing Overwatch in season 5. Ready? Do you get it? I'm sleeping because it's boring. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Also, there's a bit of a logical problem with this, where somehow the pro 6v6 crowd doesn't seem to realize that if they both say tanks were more powerful and had more potential to do more in 6v6, but then somehow say, but that wasn't oppressive. No. If you didn't have to counterpick your tanks, that's the definition of oppressive. Like, you don't know what the word oppressive means if you think that your tank picks should be uncounterable. Now, maybe you prefer and like certain stable, reasonable, good to play with tanks like Reinhardt, Zarya, Winston, Diva to dominate the game. But players like Tim, who wanted to play Cassidy back then, who had far less options, which is much more stiff of a character, of course, there just wasn't enough answers for dive. So the devs saved the game by inventing a character who countered dive, Regina. And of course, we know how that story ended up.
Meta right now literally is ass. I would rather do push-ups. I would rather lose weight. I would rather run a mile. Things like that. Those are some things I'd rather do than play Overwatch right now in this meta, because it is boring as F.
Furthermore, there's a big percentage of shooter players that like to play DPS, and specifically the hit scan ones that poke from range. More Overwatch dedicated players are going to be more into the flex DPS or the tank support synergy and the team play of the game. I would consider myself one of these players, but Overwatch 2 is much more friendly to the players that want to play the shooty characters because their queue times are lower and there's less tanks in the way. It simply isn't true to state definitively that players didn't have a problem with 2 tanks in the way as long as they were the right tanks. No. It isn't just Orisa Sig. Like, Reinhardt Sig was hell for Metro to shoot through on Soldier. I watched him complain about it. And I think there's a massive misconception with Overwatch 2 that players think if your tank is getting countered, you automatically lost the game and there's nothing for you to do. As Jake has said, that's just not true. You can make any tank matchup work, and it's only gotten better the more they've balanced the tank in 5v5. Hog does not counter Winston and Ryan anymore. The armor rework they just did goes a long way to beat out the enemy picking 1 or 2 counters to make your life miserable. I want to detail how the counterpick matchups have evolved with that change, but we'll say that for another video. And what I would really like the 6v6 crowd to do, and Samito included, is to not move the goalpost on this point, because he stated that they will never fix it with balance, and I disagree. They've already made improvements on the counter picking situation against most tanks. When I pick Winston now and the enemy tries to go Reaper or Bastion, I can take a few hits before I'm insta-dead. That's a huge improvement, and I can't say that was ever the case in 6v6. In 6v6, if you had the wrong tank matchups, you could get hard screwed, which is part of the thing that they say they like about 6v6. I'm wondering why they think players weren't queuing for the role in 6v6, yet they say things like, oh, it was great. Aya's Echo could roll around in insta-burst tanks. Isn't that wonderful? Like, the tank experience also sucked in 6v6. They just sucked for different reasons. Both could be miserable. And this is the thing that I'm really hoping that my content can advance in the community, is learning how to actually play Overwatch 2 instead of just complaining about it nonstop, because there's so many misconceptions on how to play this game. It reminds me of Overwatch 1, where players said a lot of clueless things at that time too. And the truth was, in 6v6, if your tanks don't synergize together and the enemies do, your whole team would get rolled. It would be hard for anybody to have any impact anywhere. Whereas in 5v5, while you may still lose, you can always get an exit pick here or there, or eke out some value somewhere. You're always contributing to the game, and you don't have to just stare at shields the whole time. It's objectively true that you're shooting targets more in 5v5. I don't know why there's any pushback about this. This isn't hard to look at. Just look at the old gameplay of 2 tanks. Pick any tanks. In 6v6, you have to shoot tanks way more. You don't actually have to do that in a lot of 5v5 matchups. Players do because it's easier. They're big targets, often just standing in front, and a lot of players don't play the game in a very dynamic way. They just sort of vaguely want to face smash together, but that's part of the issue as well. The devs did dumb down the gameplay intentionally. But if we're going to admit that the game is dumbed down, the benefit to that, remember, always trade-offs, is that it's more accessible to the average player. These decisions to go to 5v5 were not intended to only benefit the top-tier meta balancing. Samito really loses the plot with this because he hinges his entire argument that no, it wasn't double shield, it was the supports that kept the double shield alive. Meanwhile, the fun factor of shooting shields wasn't good regardless. Like, they both can be bad. These aren't mutually exclusive ideas. The supports can be OP and shooting shields can also suck. These are two things that both need to be addressed. And in 5v5, supports are more heavily biased towards being offensive, more so than ever before. Because trust me, I hated Batiste with a passion in 6v6 because his gameplay revolved around hiding behind the team and mostly just shooting a shield to add shield pressure. In 5v5, I can constantly apply pressure to enemy exploitable targets. I'm crossfiring. I'm taking duels. Now, I think supports are a bit OP now in 5v5. They weren't always at the launch of the game, of course. They overtuned them a bit, but the fun factor of the gameplay loop is far better because there isn't two tanks in the way constantly. It's more of a shooter game. I'm shooting opposing players, not working down tanking defenses always. The thing that I think the 6v6ers often forget, and they're blinded by their own expertise about the game. Most players don't play the meta. So the meta support compositions and how OP they are, nobody was playing Brig. Through almost all of 6v6, players were bad at Brig. So something that was a huge problem at the highest tiers, players were just feeding on Brig for every other tier. They weren't good at the character. So no matter how OP and sustainable and how much they broke all of this, these things didn't happen for the average player. The thing that always happened was the shields were in the way. The tanks were in the way. There was less shooter game going on and more MOBA game. Now, because of that being the case, regardless of how powerful and complex and deep and beautiful the high-end tank synergy could be, players didn't want to queue it. They didn't queue it in open queue, they didn't queue it in roll queue, and even the glorious October patch. Yes, it was amazing for 1 month for top 3% of players. It didn't fix it for the rest of them. Maybe it was a bit better, but those players were playing those characters anyway. That's what I think these commentators don't realize. Like, they were already playing Rhine, and they weren't good at double shield necessarily. Not all of them. The team comps never took form for the average player the way that these high-ranked experts talk about it. What happened to the average player was what was the easiest thing to do always. And that was Rhine because he had the best shielding stats. Just put Rhine in the way. Even as OP as double shield was, you did have to aim those abilities. Otherwise you would lose. So even then, Rhine did pretty well up to GM, I'd say. It wasn't really about players struggling to counter double shield. Players have routinely shown us for 6 years of 6v6 that no matter how strong or new and novel they make the role, they didn't want to queue it. That can change a bit with the much cooler tanks we have in Overwatch 2, but we would have to assume that they would change it by like twice as much. So Gavin Winter was found in Twitch chat explaining this. Queue times now are roughly twice as good as they were in 6v6. That's an insane improvement. And again, nothing to do with the player numbers. It's about the proportion per MMR. So our confidence in 6v6 would have to be so high that it could double the effective amount of tank players that we've ever had. And the only evidence we could ever fix it was in one patch. And let me ask you this. Do we really think the devs are only going to balance it in the way that a few hundred of us creators want them to, or are they going to do what they're going to do? This is the problem. If you put all of your eggs in the October basket, you have to think somehow that the devs are going to reproduce that result forever. That strategy means they can't mess up. Whereas in 5v5, the worst thing they ever did was make support too strong, and the queue times were screwed there. But other than that, queue times have been good the entire time. No matter if tank was miserable, no matter if tank was strong, generally the queue times have been great in 5v5. Across the board, all skill tiers, even better in quick play. That was not the case in many eras of Overwatch 1, and that's a problem for your game. That kills the game, which is why I get so passionate about this, because the level of confidence we should have should be outstanding. It should be overwhelming that we should have to go to 6v6 in order to risk the downside of horrible queue times, because players still won't want to play the role. And what you don't want to do in critical thinking is called wishful thinking. Wishful thinking is when you dream up a reality you wish could exist because it's convenient and feels comfortable. Man, wouldn't it be great if we could just like solve obesity by forcing all of the fast food restaurants to serve broccoli? Geez, we'll fix it. Fix it right there. Just stop selling fast food and have them sell broccoli. We know that's not going to work, right? Because you can already get broccoli easily. Broccoli's at the store. It's not hard to get broccoli. It's not about access to broccoli. That's the problem. It's about what do humans do when they make their choices. Trust me, I eat a lot of vegetables, okay? I play tank. I play the roles that are least popular. I played support when it was weak. I love the least popular roles, but no amount of me liking it or me doing the right thing makes everyone else contribute to do the thing that's going to help everybody. And I think we've got a great opportunity to watch these other games that are coming out with Marvel and Deadlock, which have similar gameplay to Overwatch in some ways. Watch them go down this route. Watch Marvel as a 6v6 game, find whatever role is less popular but required to win be an issue for their open queue format. It's gonna happen. And Marvel, just like Overwatch had to, figure out what kind of game do they want to have. Do they want to have a freely expressive one or a sensible competitive one? You can't have both. There's trade-offs there. Either you're going to please video game donkey who thinks that just being able to play whatever you want freely should be more important, or are you going to appease like some of the hardcore players that want to play a reasonable team comp? I want a tank in front of me too, and I was willing to play that tank. It's funny, I saw Samito react to a video where the creator unironically said, man, I used to love Overwatch 1. I would play DPS at a super high level, and then sometimes I would smurf on my master's account to play Reinhardt and run people over, as if this is like a huge benefit to their argument. I'm like, wait, hold on. Yeah, well, duh, if you like smurfing, you're gonna have a good time. You can smurf in this game and dominate just with your skill. What do you mean? Why should we design the game around having an OP role that people don't want to play? Why would we do that? This is like expecting everyone else to eat vegetables for you because it makes you feel better to be around them. No. Now, I want to talk a bit about my last appearance talking about this issue on the Group Up podcast, in that SVB interrupted me when I was kind of going at Sam a little bit, and it made me feel really self-conscious, actually. Like, I was worried that I was to blame, like I was doing something wrong, and I've spent months thinking about this, actually, concerned that I was going too hard at him. I even apologized at the time. But after some time has passed and how Sam's conducted himself on his channel, and I finally went back to listen, like, was I too harsh in the things I said? I called him utopian. I said he's moving the goalpost. No, I wasn't actually. I just think Sam doesn't know what these words mean. I challenge him and the rest of you to learn what these things mean. This isn't an insult. I'm not just chatting shit. I'll respect any viewpoint if you argue logically and you don't commit logical fallacies. So what you can't do is be like Lucy from Peanuts, and when Charlie Brown gets to the football and almost swings to hit it, just pull the football away, move the goalpost, say our goal is to do this, but they could never do it, and as soon as they start to, whatever. So as an example, everyone loves to hate Roadhog. They say Roadhog doesn't function as a tank. Well, the first thing they said was he'll never function because of anti-nade. The rework couldn't work. The problem is, a lot of the conversation around this, people don't seem to know what the words work or balance mean. Work should not be a subjective thing if we're arguing about the objective principles of the system. And what is completely unfair to do is say that Roadhog doesn't work in 5v5 as an objective point, and then when I call them out on this and say, well, actually, he's incredibly effective, he's a very good tank, he's reliable, he'll win the game, he doesn't throw, he was kind of a throw pick in 6v6, so in my opinion, he works better for 5v5 because he doesn't throw the game. But then they move the goalpost to a subjective point and say, yeah, no, but it doesn't work for me personally. I don't like it. Well, yeah, but I don't like playing against Doomfist, and personally, I would like to have an answer pick that's balanced. I don't want Hog to be overpowered, but I certainly want him to be able to battle Doomfist. So let's not move the goalpost. If you say the system doesn't do a thing, you can't change your opinion when they change it. And another logical fallacy for you guys, what you don't want to do is called argument from incredulity. So to be incredulous means you just can't believe a thing. No amount of you believing it or having faith in it matters. It matters if it happens or not, right? The evidence is what matters. The faith-based argumentation in our entire game community is just out of control. We need to look at what is, not what we imagine to be. And it isn't that I have all the answers, guys. It's just that I know how to not say obviously false, fallacious things. So I'm more careful in how I make points. So I'm wrong less often, just because I don't marry myself to ideas that are provably false if they change something. This is why you don't want to make arguments that put a post in the ground that's so severe that you make it a binary they can or can't do a thing. Guys, we've seen every iteration of the game possible in 8 years. Everything's been meta. Everything's been a throw pick. It's been up and down every single time. Why would you ever say they couldn't do a thing? All they got to do is change the numbers or flip it around, or they can do anything. And this armor change is possibly one of the most surprising ones to me, because I didn't anticipate they would do a thing like this, but they reverted armor, and it means that a lot of the traditional counter picks don't function anymore. The shotgun tanks are far less effective at going at the tanks. So tank busting with a tank pick is way worse now. Some players are saying Reaper's useless because of this. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I think now it's expensive to counterpick the tank. You can still do it, but it isn't free like it was before. That's a massive improvement. When can we ever point to a time in 6v6 where they made a massive improvement other than just gutting heroes we didn't like? When did they ever like keep an interaction the way they wanted, but toned it down so that multiple things were in play? It didn't happen, guys. 6v6 doesn't do that. 5v5 does. And furthermore, there's some general things that we just always forget about 6v6, which were constant complaints about the game since launch. Universal things that like a games critic might point out, but the top ranking players of the world of our game are going to miss because they're so steeped in knowledge about the game that they miss the forest for the trees. 6v6 was way more chaotic. Way more things to track. The visual clutter was insane, no matter how they balanced it. It was hard to know where your team was. And in that style of game, it was much more important for you to play around your teammate in perfect concert. That happens a bit in 5v5, and you're certainly going to be more effective the better you are at it, but you also conversely can do a lot on your own. That was not the case in 6v6, guys. If you were good at the game, you felt that. But the game can't just be designed for the best players in the world. They were trying to make it approachable to average players out there. So when Shroud comes to our game, he doesn't get stuck in plats because he doesn't understand ult economy and the team aspects of the game. Or Dr. Disrespect, I think was silver in our game and just didn't understand why he couldn't take his own solo angles as Cassidy. What 5v5 is an attempt to do is make the game more approachable and accessible to the popular parts about it, as opposed to forcing the community to play the thing that nobody wants to play anyway. I'd respect this position more if the 6v6 camp were much more honest about the downsides of 6v6, which I don't hear them say. They really think that the October patch can be the reality of 6v6, which instead it's an outlier. This is utopian thinking, guys. It's only a matter of time that even on a pro mod version of the game, where you control all the balancing, that some perfect combination of two tanks beats out all the others. I'm confident in that. Now listen, I was a far better player in 6v6 because there was a lot more easier routes to value in hiding in the team formation, playing an easier hero. While yes, main tank had a higher skill ceiling at the top end, for the average player, it was easier because you could just anchor a position and not have to hit as many abilities. You didn't have to aim. You could kind of just stand in the right spot, receive cooldowns. I mean, like Reinhardt never pinned in Overwatch 1. It was bad to do so. Whereas in Overwatch 2, you've got to be hitting your abilities skillfully. And the problem is those aren't so hard that the top players find it challenging. They all can more or less do it. And what they're looking for is a more advanced tactics game going on, which there was much more tactics in how you moved your two tanks around in Overwatch 1. But for the average player, we aren't good enough to hit every ability on any of the tank heroes. So that allows for a lot of mechanical mastery that matters far more in the sequel, making the game feel much more like a shooter than a team comp RPG builder. While yes, the strategy and tactics of the game were more advanced at their peak potential when there was multiple tanks moving and taking space, that also lessened the impact of the shooter mechanics of the game. You can't have it both ways. What I would prefer us to do in our community is talk more about how the other roles can help the tank battle, or how to improve at their own agency on the game, rather than hyper focusing only on tank gameplay and blaming it for all the woes of the game. The squishy roles have grown to be the dominant carry impact in Overwatch 2, whereas in a lot of eras of Overwatch 1, they spectated the action. Part of me feels bad to have to disillusion you guys of some strongly held beliefs, which is the method that you're in love with the game. A lot of you are in love with the idea of the potential game we could have, but that game doesn't exist. When people come to my live stream to talk about 6v6, they make it seem like it reversed their diabetes, raised their credit score, brought their dead dog back from the grave. The grass is greener, the air is fresher. Like, no, man. Overwatch is a complicated, frustrating, diverse mess of a game, no matter what the format is. I'd like us to get back to talking about this game with reasonable expectations for what it even can do. Hero diversity, queue times, individual agency, these are all massive wins for 5v5. And we certainly will never expect the design of the game to be focused around 1% of players who are never happy anyway, because even they disagree. There's always going to be some high skill ceiling output hero that's dominating the game, and they're mad because it's not in their role. It always happens, guys. The best thing that top players can hope for is high skill expression heroes are at the top of the meta. That's it. But even then, they still find ways to hate it. Let's instead talk about what the best case scenario in the current format could be and work from there. But hey, Gavin Winter also revealed on Twitch that the dev team themselves is split on this issue because it's a big team. So maybe some of them want the same gameplay you want. I've been grinding tank on stream so you guys can see how I interact with the very frustrating role that it is, and it has its ups and downs. We'll make a separate video about the tank experience. But trust me when I say, I also found it frustrating in 6v6. The reasons change, but in every game, tanking is never as fun as carrying. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's been a long time since we've made a video this in-depth. And well, there's some pretty private reasons for that I'm gathering the strength to actually talk about, because I think a lot of you have noticed that for the past few years, I haven't quite been the same guy that I was for the majority of Overwatch 1's life. And there's reasons for that. Things happened to me that I had to deal with, overcome, evolve, and become an entirely new person. For the better, but I nearly had to die to do it. It's been a long time since I've been able to focus on my work the way that I have in this video. It's not easy to make this video. And I've only had the mental clarity in recent days, in fact, to be back to the old me again. And it's hard for me to cope with the reality that I'm not as good of a creator as I used to be, fallen so many tiers with how popular our content has been. But this video we're pretty confident in. But more importantly, I'm confident that I can be at this level again, having overcome some serious BS in life. So I'll have more to say on that. Over the years, people noticed, but it wasn't obvious enough to, cause a stir. But I want you guys to know that I'm better, I'm safe, and I'm on a right track, and I'm excited to make content like I used to. And I hope with the combination of the community as well as my friends supporting me that I can get back to, contributing to this community in a big way again. So if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like, and don't forget to hit subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. Thanks for all the support so many of these years. I'm really happy to be back, guys. Thank you so much for watching.